Mark Brennan, a Fight on State here with our weekly Tom Bradley press conference wrap. Sounds a little bit weird. I know last week I stuttered a little bit and almost said the Joe Paterno wrap. But things, the Tom Bradley era, however long it may last, we're in the middle of it now. And I'm joined here by Jeff Rice of the Center Daily Times. Jeff, one thing that jumped out to a lot of people, how much faster Tom Bradley talks. I know that's not the key to this whole thing today, but wow, it's like kind of a different vibe when you're interviewing him.
Yeah, the cadence was very different today. Not only the speed of the answers that Bradley was getting, but Paterno tended to go on tangents from time to time, and some of that was to avoid answering questions he didn't want to. Some of it was just he's got so many stories, but Bradley was kind of going one from the next, one to the next, and really giving you more information kind of per question than we're accustomed to getting from Joe.
Yeah, if you're looking for answers on what Tom Bradley's thoughts are on the Sandusky situation, on Mike McQuarrie, really even on Joe, did not give a lot of new info in those areas, and rightfully so from his perspective. He's really tiptoeing around some landmines here. I think the most, to me, from that perspective, he said he still has not talked to Joe. Ducked all questions about the Sandusky interview on NBC, mentioned that he was worried about Mike McQuarrie and reached out to him but couldn't get him Saturday. I assume he eventually talked to him. But in terms of a lot of the more salacious stuff that's going on with this situation, he really didn't tackle much of that.
No, and what he said is that he's trying to keep things as normal as possible for the players, and really normal is a word that's kind of gone out the window in the last week or so, but he's really trying to stick to the basics as far as game preparation. He's finally got his staff, I think, a little bit sort of back together, figuring out who's going to do what as far as coordinating the defense, running the offense, what his role will be on either one. One of the things he said today that I hadn't even thought about was he's going to be working with Anthony Farrah a little bit with kicks. Everybody's been talking about what Mike McQuarrie's meant to the wide receivers, but he also did a lot with Penn State's kickers, and I think that's something that Bradley's going to have to fill in for him as well. Yeah,
Tom Bradley said that he will not be making defensive play calls this week. He did last week because it was a quick turnaround from when the staff was shaken up. So it sounds like, if I'm reading him correctly, Ron Vanderlyn and Larry Johnson will be in those roles. I assume Vandy up in the press box at Ohio State, Larry Johnson down on the field. Tom's going to be available to have more input on offense. Doesn't sound like he's going to be involved in the play calling, but just an extra set of eyes. And it really sounds like he's trying to help out wherever he can, because clearly, it's very seldom that teams. I mean, at Penn State, it hasn't happened in our lifetime. Definitely not in definitely not in your lifetime. But to go through this sort of change mid-season, very difficult. Offensively, they added Bill Cavanaugh to take over for Mike McQuarrie as a receivers coach and also as recruiting coordinator. So those are kind of the key changes, and it seems like he's trying to juggle to do as much as he can.
Yeah, I think Penn State's fortunate not only to have a guy that's been around as long as Tom Bradley has to step in as head coach, but to have two guys like Johnson and Vanderlinden who can step in and really run the defense, just as well, and have the respect of their players, have as much knowledge as they have and experience as they have. And then you also have the experience, other than McQuarrie, the offensive staff really hasn't changed too much except for Paterno himself maybe, instituting some input here and there. You won't have that, obviously, but I'm not sure Bradley's going to do too much of that, as Mark said and as Bradley said, with the play calling on offense. But he'll still probably make the fourth down calls. He'll still make the decision to punt or go for it, things like that.
Yeah, Bill Cavanaugh, by the way, as a GA, he was doing a lot of work on the recruiting front. Now, he wasn't able to go out on the road and do that sort of thing, but they always have one of the GAs doing a lot of the administrative work, so that makes a lot of sense. In terms of him working with the receivers, I'll be anxious to see how that works out. Last week, they put Terrell Golden working with the receivers, a guy who played wideout at Penn State. Didn't have a great career, but had an okay career, and I think they really, it looks like they had to make some sort of decision. Do you go with the guy who's more familiar with working with the receivers, or the guy who's more plugged into the recruiting scene? And it looks like they went with the guy who was more plugged into the recruiting scene.
Yeah, and last week you really didn't see as many wide receivers rotating in and out of the game as you typically see. In the last few years, even going back to Deion Butler and Derek Williams, Penn State rotated a lot of guys in on each play, a lot of receivers in and out on each play. They did that a little bit last week, but not as much as normal. I'd be curious to see how happens going forward to those last 2 games.
Yeah, it sounds like Silas Redd is okay. He was banged up. He had told us he had a collarbone. They were calling it a shoulder. I don't know what. But he did play at the end of the Nebraska game, and it sounds like he's going to be okay. Otherwise, was there? I'm not recalling any other. Was there other significant personnel information that came out, or am I missing something?
No, that was pretty much it. And it was interesting to see last week they were giving Redd, I think, some more breathers even before he got injured in the second quarter. You saw a lot of Brandon Beecham and Stephon Green early in the game, even before Redd suffered that injury. And I think we'll see, even if Redd is able to play this week, I think we're still going to see a lot of Green and Beecham.
Yeah, another thing, getting back to the recruiting, I know there was something I wanted to mention there that I knew I forgot. Tom Bradley said that they did have it sounded like a conference call almost, or with parents of recruits and recruits last week. They're limited. They can only make one call, one contact to recruits. And imagine during this crazy time how difficult it is. He did not get into the specifics, but he said it was very productive. They got a lot of really good questions, and his goal was to present kind of a united front from Penn State, that people were getting the same information from all of the representatives of Penn State that they were talking to. Likewise, a lot of the player parents, they had a similar meeting with the current player parents, and it sounded as if that was productive too. Now, he's obviously going to put the best possible spin on that, but at this point, you're really in damage control mode on a lot of fronts, and it sounds to the extent that he can do it, it seems like he's been handling things, and the players at Penn State have been handling things a lot better than the administrators.
Yeah, and Bradley even went so far as to say he'd like to maybe have those player call or parents calls maybe once every 2 weeks or so. Institute that the rest of this season, and who knows what's going to happen next season. But I think that's good. They need to be as transparent as possible right now. They need to send out a unified front right now. They need to take any questions that they're getting from parents on the team or parents of current players, parents of recruits. Anyone that is going to have an affiliation with this program needs to know what Bradley knows, and I think that was the main message of his conference today. He's trying to get across to the players what he knows. If they ask him a question and he doesn't know, he's going to try to do his best to get the answer and get back to them.
Oh, by the way, Penn State hits the road to play Ohio State. I mentioned it earlier. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about that, but the one thing I liked, we did start to see some of Tom Bradley's humor come out. He talked about Ohio State coach Luke Fickell, who's gone through his own difficult times. Obviously, he's an interim guy in the middle of a controversy at Ohio State, and they were able to, commiserate a little bit. And one of the funny things that Tom Bradley said is, or was it Fickell? I forget which one said, but Fickell was hit with this stuff. Was it last March? And Bradley's hit with it in the middle of the season. So it was good. Obviously, both people find themselves in difficult situations. Tom Bradley in the middle of some of this horrendous allegations here in Happy Valley, but to be able to see some of the humor, I thought was nice.
Yeah, and on that note, Terrell Pryor, who obviously went through a lot of things himself at Ohio State, had been recruited by Bradley. He still texted him from time to time. He said he got a text from Pryor this week just supporting him, and he said, again, Bradley's showing some humor. I don't know if he's going to support me once we get into the horseshoe, but he's at least supporting me until we get there. So.
Yeah, there was some talk about whether it's a good thing to get on the road to escape all this. They did not make players available this week. I completely understand that from the players' perspective. From an overall PR perspective, I think that may have taken some of the focus away from this other stuff. But I give them credit. These guys, I give Bradley credit because these guys were hit with an awful lot, and they deserve a chance to take a step back and just focus on football for a week. Even though we don't get our interviews, I get it. From a PR standpoint, maybe it's better to have good news, but I'm okay with it. I think it was a good decision.
Well, if they got questions about the game, they would answer the questions about the game, but just the nature of this whole thing, they were going to get questions about everything else, and, they don't really know any more than anyone else does, and there's only so many ways they can say that. I think that was what went behind the decision to keep the players off limits this week, and, we'll probably hear from them after the game either way, and they might even have to deal with some of those questions after the game, but, it's just part of continuing to deal with all this, and, they'll have to, we'll see them again from a football standpoint soon enough.
Yeah, I mean, we all feel terrible. I mean, you try to be objective as a reporter, but you get to know these guys a little bit. We're certainly not friends with the players, but you cover them and you get to know them, and most of them are really good guys, and it's horrible to see what they've gone through. Bradley also said they're planning on some sort of pregame, I don't know if it's a ceremony or what, to honor. He didn't use these words, but it sounds like something to honor the victims of child abuse, which would be be a really nice thing. And he's getting the sense from the people at Ohio State, which can, that could be a really hostile environment, that maybe it will be hostile. And don't mind people sneaking behind us. That's only Ron Musselman trying to duck behind us. But, my point being, you would hope that they're as loud and that sort of thing, but you have to wonder what sort of, if they're going to take the lead from Fickle and the administrators out there and maybe not be as tough with some of the, tough comments that you think may come.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State fans are a very passionate group. They've been through a lot themselves this past year, but I think this is an issue that is not just a Penn State issue. This is an issue for the country, for the world, and I think everybody's trying to, band together as much as possible. I'd like to think we're going to see a good reaction from the Ohio State fans, from the Ohio State team, program, university this week. We'll just have to see when we get out there.
Yeah, and from the perspective of the Penn State players, it probably is good, even if you're going into a hostile environment, to get away from all of this in Happy Valley for just a little bit, to, maybe just hang out at the team hotel, take a deep breath, and, reflect a little bit, and ultimately go out and play the game, and then get back here and then worry about going out to Wisconsin next week. What's your take? I mean, do you think they're going to be able to put this to be able to focus? I really wonder. I mean, I was impressed by the way they played against Nebraska. Even though they lost the game, they came back. They showed a lot of heart. They showed character. They were great before the game. They were great after the game. I really wonder if, after putting that much emotion into a game, if they're going to be able to do it again for the next couple of weeks. And that's the one concern I have going out there, is that maybe this is when it all hits them.
Yeah, I was going to say that, they played pretty well. They didn't have a lot of mental mistakes in that game. They really kept it together that way. But you wonder, now that it's had a week, an extra week to maybe sink in a little bit, is it going to hit them differently than it did last week, when I think the players were still, and everyone else was still so much in shock of what happened, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that they didn't really have time to process it and think about it going into the game. So we'll have to see how they are. But like you said, Penn State, other than Red, is pretty healthy right now. The defense is playing well right now. Hopefully they've got some of their logistical problems on offense figured out this week, but the focus is going to be the big thing, no matter who they're playing any other game this year.
Yeah, we're here in the Beaver Stadium media room. People milling about. Well, at least one person milling about. We won't mention names, but the interviews go on right behind us. We're with Jeff Rice of the Center Daily Times. Jeff, where can people see your work and some of the coverage that you guys have been doing on the team and obviously on the greater issues that are involved here?
CenterDaily.com.
Very easy. I appreciate you joining me this week. I'm sorry to be laughing, but we have some other things going on here. I'm Mark Brennan of FightOnState.com. We wrap these things up every week, no matter who the coach is. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.